Hey there, everybody. We'd like to invite you to visit South Dakota through the eyes of local Lou. She'll take you on a tour of lots of things to see and do. So enjoy your virtual visit through the eyes of local Lou.
Hi, and welcome to the Local Lou podcast. Today, we actually have a guest, which is really exciting. We have Kevin Gantz, the curator of education at the Sioux Land Heritage Museums. Welcome, Kevin.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on today.
Yeah, thank you for coming. I want to start with your title as curator of education at the Sioux Land Heritage Museums. Can you tell us, how long you've been with the Sioux Land Heritage Museums and a little bit about how the museum preserves our community history?
Absolutely. Well, I am just a few months shy of having worked for the museum system here for 30 years. So I
Oh my
started with the museum
gosh,
right
that's
after
cool.
college. So, and Sioux Falls is not my hometown. I'm a transplant here to Sioux Falls, but I always joke that I know more about Sioux Falls history than I do my own hometown now. But it's my job to know what kind of is going on in this town, but what has gone on in this town. And that's really what the museum is about. So our museum system today that, you all can enjoy is made up of 3 sites. So we have the old Courthouse Museum with a number of different regional history exhibits. We have the Pettigrew Home and Museum, which was left by Senator Pettigrew. I'm sure we're going to get a little deeper into that today, and some gallery space there. And then our newest facility is the Irene Hall Museum Resource Center. And that is where we're holding all the stuff, all the artifacts, our archives, our artifacts are there. We have over 100,000 items in the collection of the museum. And that's one of our biggest kind of accomplishments, but one of our biggest goals is to preserve not only just the tangible artifacts, the tangible pieces of our history, but also kind of recording some of those stories and learning more about what has made this area unique and who these people are and what was their story, because we all do have a unique story. And how can we educate people with that? And that's where I come in through some of our programming at the museum. But how can we even teach people to collect their own stories and share their own stories and make sure that, they are telling the next generation what it's been like to be here? So we wear a lot of hats here at the museum, but at the core, we're about preserving the past here for future generations.
That's fascinating about wearing a lot of hats. I think that anytime I'm looking up some of the early settlers and stuff, it's like, well, he was a judge and the justice of the peace. He also served on the. It's just like you have to wear so many hats because it's like just you. Like you're holding down the
Well,
fort for us.
exactly. Yeah. When we look at our founding fathers and mothers, they didn't, they weren't just sitting in the house hoping things happen. They had to make things happen. And that's,
Yeah, and that
you do
is
that by getting
definitely
involved. So
Yeah, that is definitely what we're going to talk about today, making it happen. But also, to go back to the transplant thing, I almost feel like when you aren't from somewhere, it gives you such a great opportunity to learn the history in a more straightforward way. Because I think when you live somewhere forever, which I would know because I've never lived anywhere forever, but I think when you've lived somewhere forever, you kind of inherit pieces of the history as you're growing up, whether they're true or not. And so you might not even seek out to find out if they're true because you've always heard it that way. So why would you even look into it? So I definitely feel like the transplants are where it's at for history.
yeah, we get a lot of those questions. I think there's a lot of questions and stories that have circulated out here. Well, this has always been told like this. And, part of it, we try to either corroborate those stories or maybe we try to maybe find out. And what we usually find is there's a grain of truth in everything, but it might be
Yeah.
one perspective of it. And, we all get maybe the prejudices of our family. They didn't get along with that family. So, while they were always no good, they never did anything good for Sioux Falls. And maybe that's not the case. Maybe there was just a little squabble back in the day. Nobody remembers what really even happened. So digging a little deeper is always pretty interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of like the Hatfields and McCoys where it all started with a pig, right?
Yeah.
But then people died. And it's like, what? What's happening here? So
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
honestly think I honestly think too that like legend and lore, there's a place for that in history. I've been asked a lot about like Jesse James and there are pieces of the James brother history that can be legitimately traced to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And then when you get into the Garretts and stuff, it's like sure it's legend and lore, but there's a place for that too. I think as long as it's like
There's a place
noted,
for it.
like
Yeah,
legend
exactly. And I
has
will
it,
tell you, amongst our own staff here, we have people who grew up and lived in Garrettson all their life and fully believe Jesse James made the jump. And I have had historians and scholars come and speak where they have said, we don't believe Jesse James ever jumped that gulch. And, so yeah, we get both sides of the coin a lot from the museum. So
Yeah, and possibility, plausibility, those are different things. And there's also the there's the fact that like if a posse was following him, it totally makes sense to me at least that if I was in a posse that was following Jesse James and he got away in a totally normal way, I would definitely tell people he jumped a 15-foot gulf. Like I would just tell people that because it's like I would
yeah,
come off
yeah,
better. Like it just
absolutely.
makes more sense. It's like,
Yeah,
and then
it
out of
wasn't my
nowhere, his
fault that he
horse
got
grew
away.
wings. Yeah, like we totally tried, guys.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I do want to kind of start with kind of a not necessarily a silly question, but one that's I think kind of open to I don't know, it kind of shows a little bit about like your focus of history and a little bit about Sioux Falls. So if Sioux Falls had a mini Mount Rushmore, who would the four Sioux Falls founding fathers or mothers be that make it onto the mount?
Well, I took this in two different ways a little bit with thinking a
Okay.
little bit about this because in some ways, Senator Pettigrew did this already for himself. If you come and visit the Pettigrew Museum today and you come and when you get to the front parlor of the home, there are four portraits on the wall in there. And I call them founding fathers of Sioux Falls. And he made sure those portraits are there. And of course, he is one of the portraits. But
Duh.
then you also have, imagine that.
Yeah.
You also have Charlie Howard, who's in there. And early days, Charlie Howard had worked as a railroad man on the Missouri. He had worked for the American Fur Company. And he came here to Sioux Falls and he ran the Sutler store at Fort Dakota. And then after the fort left, he owned the first basic general store here. And everybody knew Charlie Howard. He was a great guy. And they talk a lot about the fact that he extended credit to people. These homesteaders were coming in and there had been years of drought. There had been years of grasshopper plagues. And he didn't
Grasshoppers.
want to
Ugh.
see, yeah, he didn't want to see people quit. And he's like, you know what? You plow your field. I'll advance you the seed to plant this year. I don't want you to give up on Dakota. And he extended himself out so far that when he died, he was pretty much penniless. So they took up a subscription and there's an over 30-foot obelisk to him in Woodlawn Cemetery dedicated to this pioneer merchant who helped everyone. So and he's a good guy. Don't get me wrong on that one. Nye Phillips, one of Pettigrew's best friends, and here at the same time. And Nye was in the hardware business for a while. He's register of deeds of the county. He's warden of the state penitentiary for a while. Holds a lot of different civic offices here. So he's an important figure in there. And the other one is L.T. Dunning. Now, maybe he had to include Dunning a little bit because Dunning was his brother-in-law. Dunning married his
Sure.
sister. His older sister had us, but he's a pioneer druggist. He owns the first drugstore here in the city. And all of these guys are early guys and they're here, they have a real commitment to Sioux Falls and seeing its growth. Now, I did it the other way a little bit too. And I said, well, let me think a little bit about this. And what if we had a Mount Rushmore that was just with the faces of our founding mothers?
Yay.
Who would be on there? And I came up with names like Helen McKinnon
Yeah.
and the many things that she did for this community and the gifts that she gave us that we are still enjoying today. I also put Winona Axtell Lyon on there.
100%. Yes. Love
A
her.
woman who a founder of the Women's History Club, and, just very interested in the welfare of mothers and children. Again, donating, just a few weeks ago here, just a couple weeks ago, we were enjoying the Sioux Empire Fair, which is at the W.H. Lyon Fairgrounds, donated by her and her family to make sure that we still have a fairgrounds to enjoy today. I put Hattie Phillips on that list as well. She's coming here with her husband, and she's one of the few women in the middle of nowhere with all of these men. And believe me, I've seen photographs. I wouldn't have crossed Hattie Phillips at all. She was a tough woman, and her husband dies young, and she has many children. And she goes into the hotel business, and she's running a hotel, builds a beautiful home, and she makes sure that her land, which is now today Terrace Park, gets into the Sioux Falls Park system. But then my fourth one, actually, I took it much later, and someone who we all remember here, and that's Sylvia Hankin. Because I was like, well, who would we
Oh,
put on there? Well, Sylvia, because I think she came at a time when Sioux Falls needed to figure out what its next steps were going to be.
yeah.
I feel like Sylvia became a real champion for us in the 80s and the 90s when Sioux Falls, especially our downtown area and such, weren't incredibly sure what was going to happen, and she became a passionate supporter of Sioux Falls and wasn't scared to tell anybody about what a great
Hmm.
community this was. And so, really, maybe she can be that founder of our modern Sioux Falls that we have today. So I put those four ladies on my Mount Rushmore. Yeah.
Those
So
are fantastic. I love it. Those are really great picks. And I like the mix of old and new too, because I couldn't agree more that like the recent history, some pieces of that might end up 100 years from now being like these really pivotal moments. I mean, specifically with our downtown, little did we know that that time in the 70s, 80s, and 90s was so pivotal because it very easily could have lost so many more of those buildings very easily, and our downtown could be super boring. Like, we are so lucky that we
I
have as
I
many of the
get such
buildings
a
that we do.
charge when you go downtown today. You go
Yeah.
down there and there are just people everywhere, and you have a hard time sometimes walking down the sidewalk because there's so many people in downtown. Well, 30 years ago when I started at the museum, that was not the case.
No.
We've come a long way, and there's people who, they need the pat. They need the recognition for what they did to help bring the community into our modern age.
Absolutely, and I feel like I was just looking at the history of Zambros not that long ago, and just they totally had, I always call it a field of dreams moment, but like if you build it, they will come because they were building in a desert. Like there was just, I mean, downtown, like it was rough. And, if they hadn't have been able to buy that building and, also utilize it as a place to live, and then the shop that's just so unique and cool and vibrant, obviously it wouldn't be there. And it's a piece that's been there for so long now that you can kind of take it for granted. But I love stuff like that where there are these little businesses where it's like, oh man, you're so important. Like you are so important to our
Yes,
downtown. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. I remember the first time that I ever came here, it was shortly after what was known as the Hanson Building. It was historically more known as the Polton Building at the corner of 11th and Phillips had just burned down, and that was a gaping hole in downtown Sioux Falls. It was,
Yeah.
that was a big loss for the community at that time, and there was a lot of uneasiness and a lot of people who were unsure what was going to happen there, what was going to happen with any part of downtown at the time. Yeah,
Mhm.
so you have businesses who really they were really gambling. They threw the dice on whether people were coming back to Sioux Falls, and they made the right choice.
Yeah, they did, but man, they had to stick through it. And they're having to stick through stuff now too. I mean, there's always these changes going on and it takes people a while to accept things being different. So you actually did a history talk that I went to where you talked about a lot of the downtown buildings and different things that they had been, different businesses they had been. And that was really cool to just be able to kind of like walk through the doorway of a place and just see all the different like iterations. It was really neat. And I feel like You said something about, like, wasn't everywhere downtown Scully's at some point or Skelly's at some point,
Yeah,
like, I mean
Scared was in every downtown building that there ever was,
yeah,
I swear.
the omnipresent bar, like, it's too
Yeah,
funny.
absolutely. It had to move, but, people wanted it. That's for sure.
Yeah, they did. And I can think of, I feel like it was called the Brick House. It's where, Chef Lance's is now. I feel like it was called the Brick House
Yeah,
Brewery. And they were just ahead of their time, man. Like, it was a great
yeah, yeah.
place. They had great music, great craft beer. But it was at the time where people are like, $5 for a beer, you're crazy. It's like, no, they're not.
Yeah. And
It's the
unfortunately, that has
future.
happened to some businesses, right? Yeah, they have.
Yeah.
They've been a little bit before their time, and now if they existed, well, they'd be prospering. That's for sure. That's for
Yeah,
sure.
definitely. Because yeah, we have those places like Remedy and Ferns. I mean, they're making a killing downtown, but yeah, they were just a little too early. But I know, sorry, I get off track. But we are gathered here today to get to know RF Pettigrew more. Honestly, I knew that you were kind of like the Pettigrew scholar of Sioux Falls, so I sort of I am not sold on this guy, and I kind of figured that you'd be a good source for me because I don't necessarily I don't need to fall in love with him, right? But I do want to like him a little bit more because I don't find him very likable. So I'm hoping you can broaden my horizons a little bit. Can you tell me a little bit about like RF Pettigrew, like what made him tick, and was he like necessary for the development of Sioux Falls, like from a village into a city?
Thanks for calling me a pedigree scholar, but I mean, like
Yeah.
it's part of my job. And a lot of people have gone deep into Pettigrew, and I completely understand where you are, and I think at the time that R.F. Pettigrew lived, there were people who either liked Pettigrew or they hated Pettigrew. I don't feel like there's a lot of middle ground for people. I'm going to admit that one time, this was early in my career at the museum, I gave a tour to a family that came in, and one of the women, she was probably in her 70s or 80s, and she goes, I can't believe I'm in this house. And I'm like, well, why is that? I have Pettigrew trying to have my grandfather killed. And I was like,
Oh,
whoa, whoa,
okay.
I'll need to hear a story about that, I
I'm
think. And
listening.
she went into a story about how her grandfather was living out in the pier area. And there was quite a contentious time because the railroad was trying to come through and buy right of way through this area and these farms. And many of these farmers did not want to grant right of way to the railroad. And there were some public meetings about it, several that got heated. And her grandfather kind of became one of the leaders, she said, in this, no railroad, don't give in, don't sell your land. And as he was leaving one of these meetings in the evening, a shot rang out and a bullet whacked the door jamb right above his head. And she's like, Pettigrew is the one that came after him. So I'm like, okay. Well, now I'm like, so you don't have any
Gasp.
definitive proof that our Pettigrew
No,
tried
but that's
to have your
good.
grandfather killed, but apparently, yes, indeed, things got heated in early Dakota, and
Oh, I
you know,
bet.
um, I'm not so sure he
Are you
was taking
watching?
people.
Well, we don't know. He tried. Maybe, allegedly.
Maybe, who knows?
Yeah.
There's no historical evidence right now on that
There you
one.
go. So, are you watching The Gilded Age at all?
Love the Gilded Age, love it,
Okay, good.
yes.
Because, like, while you're telling that story, I'm thinking of George Russell, Railroad Daddy. And,
Yeah,
like, it's like, is Pettigrew our railroad daddy?
kind of, yeah, absolutely. He
Yeah, it
would claim
seems like it.
responsibility for bringing all 5 railroad connections here to the city and that is kind of his deal. I will couch some of what I will say to you today too, to understand that Pettigrew is a man of a certain time in our history.
Yeah,
And I think we look back with modern eyes on how things went about 130, 140, 150 years. And we need to understand that, these people lived at a time where certain things were more accepted than they are today, or business
right.
practices were maybe a little bit different. So I always like to tell people, like, we've got to we've got to look at people for where they were, where they were sitting at the time. But that doesn't necessarily excuse what some of the things that they did or how their actions, actions have consequences, and perhaps a few people in history should have had more consequences that happened to them. So I think when we look at RF Pettigrew, that's one of the things that we have to understand. I think one of the other things that's really important about him as a man and as a founding father of our community is he gets here early. And that's the
He
thing. I think
does.
that's true. Every community across the way. If you get there early, you can kind of make things happen the way you'd like them to happen. The other thing, he's a young guy. I think that's the other thing too. We look at, photographs of him and we see him as an old man, in many of the photographs that we have, but he's a young guy. He's in his 20s, and he gets here. And what do 20-year-olds do when they're starting out in business and they're trying to make connections? Is they start networking. And that's exactly what this guy did. He started networking, and he started joining the right clubs, and he started meeting people, and he went out and made connections with people in other communities. And he made connections with people who were going to be able to help him in the future. So I think those are some of the things that lead him into success in his early days, is those connections. Because I love to tell the story that, when it becomes time for railroads and such, there's this guy he had met. He was out on one of his surveying jobs, and he's in North Dakota and up in the northern part of Dakota. And he meets this guy named Jim Hill, and they kind of hit it off. They're about the same age, and, they're talking, and they become pretty good friends. And so, well, Jim Hill becomes James J. Hill, founder of the Great Northern Railroad. And, so
Wow.
Pettigrew has these connections with people who become very prominent and successful in business. So he's got the connections to kind of make things happen at the time. So some of these things are what's making him tick. I think he has an honest to goodness desire to see Sioux Falls grow and prosper and become a city. I think
Absolutely.
he came early. He saw the potential of it. And for all the things, and we'll probably talk more about things, I think in looking back at it, he wanted to see this community succeed.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, even though, again, it behooves him. Like, he's not doing it
Yeah,
for giggles. Um,
yeah, it's not free.
yeah.
He gets land. I mean, how do you make money at that time? Well, you make money, you get him the railroads make money. So you get involved with the railroads. Land makes money. He
Land, yeah.
starts in the real estate business as well. How do you ensure things happen in your area? Well, you get involved in the politics of your area. You get
Mhm.
involved in the politics at a local level. For him, it was at the territorial level, later the state level, and then at the national level. So, he got involved where he needed to get involved. And it also worked out real well for him too.
Right, but he wasn't, like, sitting on his laurels either, I mean, he was making
No,
it happen.
no,
Yeah, nothing, like,
he was
came to
making it
him.
happen.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So
And he came from a humble background. It's not like
yeah.
this is, some East Coast magnate, he was going to inherit lots and lots of money. I think his family were merchants. He kind of comes from what is starting to develop as kind of a middle class at that time in our country. Sixth of nine children. He goes to college. He goes to school. He goes to college. He gets a law degree. And, you know, he's a smart guy. He's well
Mhm.
read. He's a smart guy, and so he's going to take all of those tools that he's got, and he's gonna move forward. And Sioux Falls is the result.
Right, and I mean, better for it, so there's that too. So do you have a favorite Pettigrew story? This could be legend or lore too. I mean, it doesn't have to be like 100% like provable. Like, but just,
There are so many stories associated with this man, and I'll just touch on the one. Obviously, everybody there's that legend and lore of him damming the river and getting investors to invest in such. And there's a current of truth and a current of, fiction a little bit in that too. Yes, I think, there was an existing dam he put some planks up on. And before he took men down there, it was, he had them remove the planks and the water was rushing. But really it was more for photographers than in really investors. But he's promoting, he's
Mhm.
a showman. No
Yeah,
P.T. Barnum
marketing.
here,
Yeah.
but he's a showman
Yeah.
at that. But yeah, marketing. We all got to market. You've got to
Yeah.
market. But I really like, as stories go, I really like his trips to the Black Hills. Today we all hop in the family caravan and we take a trip to the Black Hills. Well, guess what? He did it too. But every time he goes to the Black Hills, I swear his adventures are adventures none of us want.
Oh,
So
God.
the first time he ever talks about going to the Black Hills is in 1877. And of course, he has to ride a stage out there. And he's in this stage and he knows that, these stages that are going into the Black Hills are being held up by bandits all the time.
Oh,
Like
gosh.
it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So he
Yeah,
tells
like
the
he's
story that
painting a
he's in there
target
and
on
he's
his back.
yeah, there is. He's, so just the guy you want to be riding with in a stage too. So, everybody's riding in the stage. He's like, listen, everyone, we're probably going to get held up here. And, of course, at that time, everybody's armed to the teeth. They got their pistols and everything. And he's like,
Sure.
our best course of action is just do what they say. Let's put our pistols in our bags. Let's, don't antagonize them. Do what they say. They'll,
Right.
yeah, they're probably going to lift a few things. We'll pay them a little cash. We'll be on our way. Sure enough, his stage gets held up. And they pull him
Yikes.
all out into a line and everything. And the whole time that this is going on, he feels like he recognizes one of the guys. There's two guys. He
No.
knows they got bandanas up and such. He's like, boy, I feel like I know this. He says he works his way to the end of the line here a little bit because they line everybody up out there. And these guys are relieving everyone of their money and their watches and
I
such.
bet.
And the kid comes to him and, and Pettigrew calls him by name. And he's like, what would your mother say? It's one of
Ooh,
those. And sure
girl.
enough, it is this local kid from the Sioux Falls area whose family farmed just outside of town. And he had gone out to the Black Hills to stake his claim and make his fortune. Well, it didn't happen for him. And so he turned to a life of crime and
Oh
everything.
my
And
gosh.
because of that, the guy ends up handing Pettigrew back his watch. And
Mhm.
so the robbers leave and everybody gets back in. And then you can only imagine just sitting there with everybody glaring at you
Yeah.
with, well, we just got lifted
Yeah.
of all of our valuables and there you are with your watch. What gives?
Do you
And
have the
so,
time?
So he goes into this whole story. Yeah, I knew the guy and everything like that. And that's why this happened. So that time doesn't go well for him. Well, he goes back to the Black Hills in 1879. Every couple of years, need to take a trip. He goes in 79, and this time he's up in Bismarck first, and then he takes the stage into the hills. And, he's saying, we're being bumped around in the stage. This time they're all, again, armed to the teeth, beans and rifles and everything. And they do a stop. They stop near what would be today Belfouche, and they're kind of giving the horses a rest. And he notices that, the guy who's sitting up with the driver, he's got his rifle out and he's taking a bead at an antelope that's, pretty far distant. It's going to be a long shot. And, Pettigrew goes, well, he goes, I know that, I was never going to, never make it. I'm not any kind of, great shot. My carbine can't do it. But he aims well above the antelope. He knows it won't be no straight shot. And he shoots before the wagon master does. Don't you know he hits the thing and it goes down. So now all of a sudden he's got this reputation as some dead shot. He,
Some
watch out for
sharpshooter.
Pettigrew. The reputation.
Well, it's
precedes
true.
him
I mean,
into
he took a
that.
shot at that railroad guy. I mean,
So he gets in the Black Hills. He's in Deadwood for a while. He's like, that's a wild place. Watches a guy literally walk down the street and get shot. Everything that you might have seen on the Deadwood TV show. He's like, yeah, that's all going on right there.
Yeah.
And he goes and he's visiting mine. They're looking at mining interests, and he tries, like all of us, he tries to climb Harney Peak, better known as Black Elk Peak today. Doesn't make it all the way up. He's like, this is up and down and such. He goes, I'm done. On his way down, he shoots a deer. He's going to take a deer back to camp for them to eat. So he's like, I'm walking down the trail. I got this bloody haunch of deer on my shoulder. And he goes, I got this feeling like I'm being watched. And
No.
pretty soon out hops a mountain lion in front of him, eyeing the deer. And he goes, I don't want to tangle with this mountain lion. So
No.
he drops the haunch of deer, backs
Smart.
away, and the mountain lion has a tasty supper, and Pettigrew doesn't within that. But his travels through that take him back to Deadwood, and he's hanging out with Seth Bullock for a while, and they're like, let's go on in
cool.
here and have a drink to the bar. And they go in, and they go up to the bar, and he orders drinks, and this guy comes up next to him and he's like, well, hello. He goes, well, I'll drink with you. And this guy has the drink and, then walks away. And Seth Bullock says to him, it's like, well, do you know who you just bought a drink for? He goes, no, I have no clue. He's like, well, that was Calamity Jane.
Yeah.
So, he's hanging out with Seth Bullock and he's buying drinks for Calamity Jane.
That's
And then
fascinating.
also, and that same night, he hears a row. He's staying at this boarding house. He hears a row outside. He grabs his stuff. He's out there looking, and the building's on fire. And he ends up hopping out. He jumps out a window and down a lean-to and goes up on the street. Well, it is the great Deadwood fire. He sits on the hill
and he escapes.
and he watches Deadwood burn that night.
Wow.
And
Oh.
the next morning, he goes down there, and where saloon number 10 had been, George Hurst is there with another guy playing poker in the ashes.
Oh my gosh.
On a plank through 2 barrels and everything. So, his stories to the Black Hills are just insane with it.
Yeah.
And, I love him. And, in 1880, he goes back again. I'm like, Pettigrew, learn. Don't go to the Black Hills because it never turns out well for you. He's coming back and they take the stage again and there's snow. It's in the spring and there's snow. In the snowstorm, the stage driver loses the trail and Pettigrew realizes they aren't in the right place and they stop and, he's talking to the guy and he's like, we're not in the right place. Pretty soon we're going to end up on the Sioux reservation and that's not where we want to be.
We don't want to be there.
The guy, that's, that time is not a real great time to be in some of those areas.
Yeah. They don't want us
not
there.
everybody got along real well. Yeah. So he convinces the stage driver to change direction and he was right. Well, then they get to Fort Pier and they need to cross the river. Well, the ferry's on the other side of the river. The train is over there that they need to take. And there's ice chunks coming down the river. And the ferry guy's I am not going to cross that river with this ice floes coming down. And he says they sat there and watched the train pull out of a pier that they were supposed to be on. Finally, they convinced, this guy with this big old raft to take them across. They're almost across. The ice chunk hits the raft, punches a hole in the side of it. He goes, I had a big beaver fur coat I was wearing. I stuck my beaver coat in the hole and I sat on it.
Oh, smart.
And that kept enough water out for us to get to shore. He ends up getting on a steamboat down, the steamboat's coming down. He's like, I'm on my way down to Yankton for the winter. And he's like, come along, come aboard. He goes, we're going with the ice chunks. We'll be fine. And so he hops aboard and he's like, this captain, he's crazy. He's drunk most of the time. And he needs to take wood on, but he doesn't like the guy who's got the wood. He's like, we can go down further. And then he doesn't, he doesn't end up, so they skip getting wood and they run out of steam. They run up onto the shore and Pettigrew gets off the boat. Now he's walking across and they finally make their way through more trails and trials to Yankton where they catch a train and back to Sioux Falls. The man should never go to the Black Hills at all. It's just insane every time with the story coming back.
I think those are great stories though, because they show he has resourcefulness, not only when it comes to business. It shows that he is relentless in life, that he is just kind of like a force. And so, okay, I can see that. I kind of like that. I like the different dimensions there. Also, I mean, some of that sounds kind of hot. I mean, he wasn't a bad looking guy. So I don't know. Sounds kind of cool.
Yeah, he's just this rugged frontiersman making his way across the prairie. So.
And in a 3-piece suit, I don't get it.
Yeah.
I'm just.
Well, at least we know now he had a beaver coat. That was one of the things he had.
That's true. That's true. And I always get stuck on the shoes because like I'm wearing sneakers right now. Like and they were wearing like, what today you would consider dress shoes. Like I don't understand. Like and then I think about like when Sioux Falls had like cobblestone and like women just like hobbling around downtown. Like I don't get it.
Oh,
Like in their tiny little heels and it's just like how do people live?
I turn my ankles on uneven concrete. I mean, it's
Yeah,
just I
it's true.
suffer. I suffer. Yes.
There is a little bit of cobblestone outside of my office and stuff, and there's this one piece that I call the day tripper because it is like 3 inches higher than every other piece of cobblestone, and it's like you're trying to kill me.
Yeah. Yeah. Every time. Well, and even when Sioux Falls did have those streets, I mean, that was one of the biggest complaints, how uneven they
Yeah,
were at times. There would be settling and everything. And, you know, I know that many people know that through the museum we do our quarry tours and we learn a lot about
yeah,
how quarrying took place, a long time ago and how it goes today. But one of the things they talk about out there all the time is you got to have base. Before you put something heavy down, you create a good foundation and a good base. And, I don't think they always did that for a lot of that. So
yeah.
you end up with some pretty uneven surfaces at times.
Yes, which we definitely, I'm assuming you had. Yeah, definitely. So, okay, so kind of like talking about missteps though. So, are there any missteps along the way with Pettigrew? Just kind of things that he did that kind of give you the ick where it's just like, oh, this guy.
There's two, because someone else pointed out something else to me that I'm like, yeah, that's not great either.
Yeah.
And I think when looking at both of these, I think the man kind of went in with good intentions, but it didn't necessarily go as great as he wanted it to. And one of those was Hawaii. So he's very involved in politics. He is our senator at the time where the United States is looking to annex the islands of Hawaii. And on the outside, his arguments, they sound really great. He does not want to see us becoming an imperialist nation
Right. Right.
with that. And yet, and he's like, look, folks, I mean, just look at history. Look at what European countries have done trying to hold on to these islands in different seas. It's like that,
Mhm.
it's not a good look. And it
Mhm.
doesn't end well for anybody. And no one's really been successful with this. And another
Yeah, we
thing
don't have to
that's been,
colonize everything.
yeah, we don't have to kind of, yeah. And the other thing about it is if we annex it, they're going to become a territory. And I think it's important to remember that he had lived in a territory for a good chunk of his
Mhm.
life, and I don't think he loved it.
Mhm.
I think he thought that the United States does not treat its territories very well. You have little representation, little say in what happens. So I think that's one of the things that, he was really looking at when it came to Hawaii. What kind of gives me the ick is I can agree with all the above statements with it. But part of the other thing was that, he really didn't think Hawaii or the Hawaiian people had a lot to give to the country. And that, the form of government that was being overthrown was a monarchy at that time. And he's like, you know what? That's probably the best system of government for them. That's probably what they can handle and what they can do. And, so I think on one side of the argument, he's got making some very valid points. I think
Mhm.
on the other side, he's not coming with always the best intentions on that one
Right.
with
Yeah.
it. And he's like, yeah, leave it to the native Hawaiians and give them back what they did in their form of government, because, he doesn't necessarily think that democracy's for them and our republic is for them. So, that's an area that I have some trouble with, but yet at the same time, he wasn't trying to make his decision on that by just listening to a few people. He went to Hawaii. He listened to the Hawaiian people. He said, I thought maybe, there's a lot of information out there that says you guys really want to be a part of the US. And he goes, boy, I didn't run into a lot of people at all that said that they wanted to be a part of the
Yeah.
US at all. So,
Yeah.
you know, I-
Yeah.
so, I think we can applaud him for that end of things.
Mhm. Honestly, yeah, that is,
But he's got some other ends of that aren't great. The other thing
yeah.
that, and someone reminded me of this, and yeah, that's probably the case too, is, he probably did a lot to get the asylum in Canton
Yes.
squared away for what at that time was referred to as an asylum for insane Indians. And, I think certainly like any community anywhere, there are mental health struggles. And I think there probably were people with mental health struggles. But at the same time, I think that there were a lot of people who just were trying to subjugate, to change
Yeah.
the culture and taking people
Yeah.
who believed in their traditional way of life and were putting in these places, and this asylum was not a great place. It was
No.
not a good place for people. I think it had more to do about, the people who were running it and what they could get out of it than
Oh,
helping
yeah.
or
Yeah.
assisting any of the people who may
Yeah.
have actually really needed services, but a lot of people
Mhm.
didn't. I think, and his involvement with that, I think that's just kind of a little dark page in our history in the area. And, unfortunately his name is associated with it. So, and that's not a great look for him either.
Yeah, definitely. Those are, yeah, they feel in a similar vein too. So yeah, and people are complex. So it's hard to, yeah, to know his true like belief system. But yeah, that is interesting.
And I don't think his relations with the native people here in this area was
I
actually very good.
know. That's what
And
it's fascinating. Yeah.
so, yeah, and like at the same time, one of our volunteers, he is going through Pettigrew's papers, and he's,
Mm,
transcribing them into our database and such so that we have a better record and
cool.
a searchable record of his papers. And he brought up today, there were these Dakota who had assisted the settlers and the military during the Dakota War in 1862 as scouts and such. And then after all of this, after all of the assistance they had given, the military, the army just forgot about them, didn't pay them for their service,
Yeah.
didn't acknowledge it at all. And Pettigrew, through his time in his politics, even when he became a senator, was still trying to see this situation rectified and that these
Mhm.
men were given their due for the work that they had done at that
Mhm.
time. And even his maid, when he dies in 1926, the maid comments that several Native people come to his funeral at the home at the time.
Mhm.
So his relations with the indigenous people of our area, I think were actually pretty good. But he's got some missteps along the way, I think.
Definitely. Yeah, I went to a behind the scenes tour at the Irene Hall Resource Center, and there's like a special room that's like a dark room so the color doesn't fade of some of the Native American artifacts, and it's just so cool cuz like the colors are so like different. It's hard to explain until you see them. But the colors are just
Yeah.
different than like colors you see today. I don't know how.
And I
But yeah,
invite
they
everyone to the old courthouse museum. We just opened our new
yes.
exhibit, and it is in Indigenous America. We really wanted to look at our Native American collection. I mean, we have things from 10,000 years ago. I mean, we've got these
Mhm.
stone tools that are thousands of years old to things that were made for folks 25, 30 years ago, that are
Yeah.
in our collection. And we really wanted to run the gamut. And, we talk about these items as, these were maybe household use or day-to-day use, but today we look at them as pieces of art and the artistry that went into it and the culture and the fact that these cultures are still alive today and prospering and thriving, all things that we're trying to get across through the exhibition of that collection. So,
Yeah, and it was really neat because they had a teepee that Pettigrew had commissioned, and so I mean he paid an artisan to make it, and and so he definitely had like an appreciation for the culture. So again, people are, these onions, there's just so many layers.
I know. Yeah, and that was a Blackfoot woman in Montana, and she was a master teepee maker, and she said, "This will probably be the last teepee I ever make." And so we still have it in the collection. It is unfortunately not in an exhibitable condition
Right, but
today,
because he
but it is.
used it, right?
He used it, yes, and some curators through time thought it was looking a little dingy, and they actually painted it with house paint, and so
Sad.
it's yeah, so it's really caused a lot of deterioration of that artifact, and so that's,
That's a
a lot of
bummer.
that makes it on exhibit, but as a study piece, as an example of that artwork, yeah, it's fantastic, and it's a
Yeah.
piece that many people remember from his early museum, so.
So there is a Pettigrew statue by the Levitt in Sioux Falls. So I wanted to talk a little bit about like how did that end up there?
Darwin Wolf is the sculptor of that piece. And I actually remember meeting with Darwin. He came to the museum and he was pushing for this. And here we have this founding father, RF Pettigrew. And there's really not a lot other than a museum, his home and museum. It's kind of the only thing that, some of these other people we've talked about, sometimes we see their names in multiple places throughout our community. But really at that time, there wasn't anything else. And now it's shortly after this time that they name one of the elementary schools, RF Pettigrew Elementary, and we have Pettigrew Heights, which is a neighborhood just south of the Cathedral District. But so Darwin really wanted to do a life-size statue of Pettigrew and what he did. And I think, you look back at some of the things that Darwin said at the time that he was doing it, he felt the same way you did and do, that there's a lot to really be proud of what Pettigrew did, but there's some moments that, boy, he's complicated and he's difficult and may not be the right situation for him. But he came in, he looked at a lot of photographs. He looked at some of the different busts and statues that we have of the senator in the museum. And he did a wonderful piece of work there. And one of the things I forgot, I looked back a little bit on some of this and I had sort of forgot that, in his pose, he shows him holding a document in his hand. And that document is his open letter to the city. So his location right by the Levitt, many of us will remember that that's where Phillips Avenue used to end. You used to have to curve around on Fifth Street. You couldn't continue. Phillips Avenue did not continue down to the falls. And that is because at one point, the city decided to vacate that end of Phillips Avenue for the railroad. And
Oh.
Pettigrew was against it. He said, no, he goes, you shouldn't do this. This is not the great place for a railroad switching yard and to have all this going on. And one day you'll want this land back. You'll want to put Phillips back through. Man had
True
his crystal
story.
ball out, I think, a little bit
Yeah, true
in that
story.
one. So yeah, and so today we drive right down Phillips Avenue that has been restored, and that area now is enjoyed by many. But that
I
was
know.
a piece that Pettigrew foresaw on that. So that's a little
Hmm.
bit what Darwin was doing with that. And so, yeah, it's probably a pretty good likeness of the senator.
Well, and I think we could all agree that RF Pettigrew would definitely appreciate a life-size statue on a pedestal. That's where he believes he belongs.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I really enjoy reading is later in his life, in the 1920s, he started writing for a magazine called the Sunshine State Magazine. And he wrote some of his early stories of coming to Sioux Falls and about his early politics in Dakota, some of the fun stories. And yeah, he really made it sound, I mean, he was always casting a very good light in those, and maybe, nothing would have happened here if he hadn't been here. So yeah, I think he'd be pretty excited about it.
I mean, to be fair, like who doesn't like being the savior of their own story? Like I personally do tell stories where I come off bad, but I understand it's way more fun when you are like the victor.
Absolutely. To the victor goes the ability to tell the story, and that's happened a lot in
Yeah,
our history.
definitely, for sure. So, okay, the Pettigrew Home and Museum that's located in the Cathedral District here in Sioux Falls. Do you have like an estimate of the number of people that like go and tour it every year? And then do you have anything to say about like the maintenance of that place? Because I mean, this place is ginormous.
Yeah, so the Pettigrew Museum, Pettigrew gave his home and his gallery that he had built to the city of Sioux Falls. There was a great debate on whether the city should accept this. A lot of people
Mhm.
said, "Hey, look at we're going to have to do the maintenance on this building for the rest of its life. Like maybe we don't want that." But it became the city's museum, and along with the
Yeah.
Pettigrew's original collection, many other items have been donated. It's the basis of the Sioux Land Heritage Museums collection today. Our attendance very much does fluctuate. Last year, about 8,500 people came through. We've had as many as
That's a lot.
12,000 people come through. That's a lot. And think a little bit about that. We're talking about a house. This isn't the old courthouse
Yeah.
museum. That's a house. So think about anywhere between 8 and 12,000 people coming through your house in a
Yeah.
year. So and it is a lot on the maintenance. Our collection staff does a lot with making sure that the home stays cleaned and that steps are taken to preserve the artifacts in the home. Maintenance of the home. Right now, just this week, if you go by, you're going to probably see a lift there where we're removing some storm windows to redo some storm windows
Whoa.
and get those put back on. The roof is a slate roof, and not too many years ago, the slate roof had to be replaced. And that's not like just
Mhm.
putting on a regular shingle roof on
No,
your
I
house. So
learned that when they redid the old courthouse just
yes,
recently. That was so interesting to see them doing it piece by piece. Like,
piece by
what?
piece. Yeah, and if
Man.
done right, can last a very, very long time.
Well, I said that to somebody too. I was like, "Oh my gosh, all I know is I want to use that roofer because like this last one lasted 135 years." Like, I mean, come on.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
you
we can
can't get
find no
value
record of
like
the
that.
clock tower being done. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's great. Yeah, that's good news when you've got that. So
Good value,
uh,
man. Like it's a lot of money, but totally worth it. And I will say,
you know.
so Sue Ann Griffith, she has Lily Flag Signal, which is a podcast a lot like Local Lou, but it's in Huntsville, Alabama. And one thing that we talked about, because we did a crossover episode, because Pettigrew did a little philanthropy, well, I don't know about investing in Huntsville, Alabama. And she actually came to Sioux Falls once for a work thing, and one of the things that she did when she was here was she toured the Pettigrew home and museum. So, how about that? She was one of your 12,000.
Okay. Well, I hope that she had a spectacular tour.
She did. Yeah.
We pride ourselves, our staff, we all take time at the Pettigrew Museum. And that's the way to see the historic home is by guided tour. We have a fantastic group of dedicated volunteers who spend time learning about this man. And going through the home is a great example of a way to see how people lived in Sioux Falls at that time. Learn about
Right.
someone who thought a lot about okay, the average person, you're never going to get to go to Egypt. You're never going to get
No.
to go into the Mediterranean. You're never going, you know, to these foreign countries. And he brought things
Mm-mm.
back and he put them on display so that people in Sioux Falls are going to get a chance to be a part of that and to see that. And I think people are amazed today when I point out, see that chunk of rock over there? Well, that's from one of the great pyramids of Giza that Senator Pettigrew
Yeah.
brought back from his trip that he took there in 1923. So, yeah, I think it's a really interesting way to learn about how people would have lived at that time in our community.
Mm-hmm. So, if Pettigrew were around today, what do you think or maybe we don't know, but if he were around today, do you think there's something that he'd be pushing for Sioux Falls? Something that's going to give Sioux Falls that edge, or something that would make him a lot of money? I mean, he did like
Yeah.
money. So, is there I would say like one of the really good additions to downtown recently has been that Jacobson Plaza, where they
Yeah.
have this multiple playgrounds and splash pad and an ice skating rink and a couple places to eat and drink, and it's just such a gathering point. It is a really cool, it gives you a sense of community and like all that stuff, but there's a little commerce too, so there's some good give and take there. So is there anything that you think that he would be just pushing for right now?
Well, he's pro business. He's a pro
Mm-hmm.
businessman. So I think in the current climate of Sioux Falls, I think he would fit in well today
Yeah.
as someone
Yeah.
who's pro-business. And, I think it's always interesting when you look back at the historic record a little bit of what Sioux Falls has been, at least in this part of the Northern Plains. I feel like Sioux Falls has always been the jumping off point. This
Yeah.
is kind of our division between kind of the Midwest and the West. And I
Yeah.
think it was true in the 1870s, and I think it's true today. And I read newspapers where they're talking about, as the Black Hills are being opened up to all this mining and such, there's advertisements, will stop here in Sioux Falls, get yourself outfitted before you head out, and
Mhm.
on your trip. And I think today we laugh because, especially during the height of the tourist season, I always like to ask people where they're visiting us from and such. And
Yeah.
what they're on their way to do. Well, 90% of the time they're on their way to the Black Hills from here. They've made a
Yes.
stop in
Yes.
Sioux Falls. This is, it's a good stop. And so I think he would be very much a man to make sure that there's business and services and such for those people, and that, that you got to make that stop
Mhm.
in Sioux Falls before you head out into these other areas. I thought a little bit about too how important he thought, commerce and transportation. He was a big railroad man, how important
Yeah.
that was to the community. And, there's a lot of talk about some of the improvements that
There
are going to be going
is.
on airport. And I think
Yep.
that would have been something he would have definitely been behind, that transportation and getting people. You can't understand Sioux Falls till you've stepped foot in this place. And that's the
Right.
easiest way that you're gonna get here and find out what a great hidden gem it is. And many people are seeing that today. The number of people who are coming into our community and deciding to call this place their homes. I think he would have been all behind that. I think it's really kind of interesting. I recently watched a quick little segment on a news show about like Bitcoin and all of this. And Pettigrew was big about money and finance,
Yeah.
and I think we've got a lot of finance, the credit card industry and the banking
Yeah.
industry that's existed here in Sioux Falls. And, I kind of wonder where he would fall on some of that. I don't think he was a man, that was big on doing things a lot on credit, but, I think he would look for new and exciting ways that people might be able to invest and prosper.
Mhm.
So I think that would be the next thing to happen. I laughed at that same volunteer, that I was talking about earlier, who was, talking about going through his papers. He goes, sometimes I just really wish that I could sit down in the Pettigrew Museum some night and just maybe Pettigrew would show up to visit with me.
Yeah. It's true though,
And we could
because
talk
I
about,
mean, go
yeah.
well, anytime you're going through a dead person's stuff, there is this feeling where it's just like, I just kind of wish they were here for a minute. Like, I have questions, I have comments, I have, like, there's just these things where you don't know. You can piece together your version of events, but you just don't know where they were coming from at all. You just have what remains. So I couldn't agree with that more. And his like study just seems like such a cool, or library, is that what it is? Like right at the top of the
Yeah,
stairs
his
at
library
the
study. Yeah,
Pettigrew home.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, like, that feels like the place. Like, I agree. I wanna have, like, a brandy, I wanna sit there, I wanna, like, by candlelight, like, oh my gosh, we're doing a seance, Kevin, let's do a seance. It's very
Maybe
of
he
the
would come and
time.
tell us his business.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, gosh. Okay, so I know your time is valuable, I don't wanna keep you too long. I have 2 questions if you have time. So one of them is,
Yes.
where the bodies are buried. I heard a story at the Moody County Museum that, and maybe it's legend, maybe it's lore, but it's about Pettigrew and his brother's body, and that he brought his brother's dead body to Sioux Falls against the will of his brother's widow to bury his brother next to him in Woodlawn. Is this true?
I'm sorry, I lost you there.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So I heard at the Moody County Museum that his brother, so Pettigrew's brother, died, and that his widow buried him, like in Flandreau, and then Pettigrew dug him up and brought him to Sioux Falls to bury him here in Woodlawn. Is that true?
So part of that, yes, there's truth, and so Pettigrew's brother Fred follows him out here. Younger brother follows him in. He's considered to be a founder of the town of Flandreau. He's into the amateur archaeology as well. He's does surveying work and such, and he becomes pretty prosperous as well out here. Unfortunately, he's killed in an accident in 1901. He's living in South Sioux Falls at that time. He's walking into town. They find him laying on the prairie. He's been hit by something. He's not talking. He lingers for a while. He passes away. Well, so he passes away in Sioux Falls. He gets buried in Mount Pleasant Cemetery here in Sioux Falls. Yeah.
Interesting.
So he's buried in Mount Pleasant with an infant child as well that had already that's his? That is his, that they had lost.
Okay. I was like, that's weird.
Yeah. Yes. Now, so there is, if you will, a family plot in there. And so Pettigrew, after the turn of the century, decides it's time for Sioux Falls to have another cemetery. We need another cemetery.
Right.
He does not like Mount Pleasant Cemetery. In an actual address in front of the city council, he states that there is no plot where he would have himself or any of his family members buried in Mount Pleasant Cemetery. And part of this, too, is he wants the city of Sioux Falls to get into the cemetery business. He's like, we got this land. You guys can start burying people and, use that for upkeep, and it'll pay for itself and all this. Sioux Falls is not interested. The city is not interested in getting into the cemetery business. So he starts the Woodlawn Cemetery Association, deeds the land to them. They start Woodlawn Cemetery. Well, one cannot be basically a founder of Woodlawn Cemetery and have your brother buried in the competing cemetery at the time. So he did have his brother exhumed with the infant child, moved to Woodlawn Cemetery. He said he bought a lot that would have cost about $500 to $600, and he had his brother moved there. Then, yes, that his sister-in-law then sold the lot that was in Mount Pleasant and took the money from that. How much he communicated with his sister-in-law about doing this is not really known. But I could see that he didn't maybe have a lot to say to her when he decided to do this.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that his sister-in-law was a cousin, like his brother Fred had married a cousin. So she was a part of the family as well. So, but some things can be telling, because we have a letter, like later on as Pettigrew's putting together his museum, he remembers some things that his brother had collected. And we have a letter that he wrote to his sister-in-law saying, I remember these pieces. Wouldn't you want to give those to me so that I can put them in the museum? And she writes him back a very formal letter. And she's like, no, myself and my children, we think enough about my husband's pieces that we should like to keep them and not give them to you. She's diplomatic about it.
Good for her. Good for her, though.
That could be a little telling as well within that. So, so today, if you do go to Woodlawn Cemetery, of course, you will find the senator's mausoleum there, but just to the east of that, a very large obelisk that is his brother Fred, that is now makes his final
impressive.
rest in Woodlawn. It is impressive, yes. Very, very large obelisk.
Where does Fred's wife end up being buried then? Is she in Woodlawn?
She is not in Woodlawn. She is not there with them. I am not sure where she ends up.
Well, it doesn't matter where she is. She's not there. That says something to me. That tells me a lot.
She is not there at all.
That tells me a lot. That tells me a lot.
Now, what's interesting is when Pettigrew, when Pettigrew opens his museum edition, he dedicated it to his brother Fred. I think he had a very close relationship with his brother. So he does that. And today, when we get Pettigrew relatives who come back to Sioux Falls and want to be, they are mostly a descendant of Fred. Fred had several children, and his descendants today are the ones that tend to come back. Many of them living they live in California today, but they have come back for different. There are no direct descendants of Senator Pettigrew because he had one son that never married and another son that married and divorced, never having children. So there are no direct descendants from his line.
Interesting. He would hate that. Or maybe you wouldn't. I don't know. So, okay, on that pedestal historical statue, they refer to him as Frank. So, is like what did Pettigrew go by mostly? Was it Frank?
So, today, and even today, you've heard me refer to him as a senator. I use his, a lot of times. I refer to him as a senator. We call him RF Pettigrew or just Pettigrew. But in the early days, pretty much his friends all called him Frank. And if you read the early
Okay.
newspapers when he's a young man, they talk about Frank Pettigrew all the time. They don't
Hmm.
call him Richard. They don't call him Frank. He's Richard Franklin Pettigrew. So, yeah. So I think too, his
Yeah.
friends did indeed go by Frank. And that's how many people would have known him.
That's interesting. Just Fred and Frank on the prairie.
Exactly.
Okay, so I know the internet's starting to be dicey. This is the last question. What do you think Pettigrew should be remembered
Okay.
for? Like in your opinion, what is the thing?
As we've talked, he's a difficult guy. He's got, like you said, he's the onion with many skins that you have to peel back. But I think when you boil it all down, he truly loved this community. He truly wanted to see this community prosper. He wanted to see it be a place where if you were willing to work for it, you could succeed. And I think that's a true testament to our community as a whole. Falls is a very, very successful community that has done very, very well. And, as I say, I'm a transplant to this area, and my family hasn't always understood why I live all the way out in South Dakota in the middle of nowhere. And then they come and visit me, and they're like, "Wow, you guys got a lot going on here. This is great." And I think that's the type of thing that would make him smile today. We do have a lot going on here in our community, and it's a lot of good that's going on. Like any community, we have our struggles, and we have to acknowledge those, but he truly loved it. And when he did work for this community, I think he was putting his best foot forward. He wanted to support the farmers in this area. He wanted to support, the businessmen. He wanted to support people who were having difficulty supporting themselves. So I think those are all things when we think about Pettigrew and we look back at him. I think those are things that we need to remember about him. And I think he would be very proud of what Sioux Falls has become today.
I love it. Well, I think you did such a great service to us today and like helping us see the different layers and helping to kind of marry it all together and not just present like the good stuff because I think that's the thing that I personally like about history is I want to see the good, the bad, the ugly. I want to remember things how they happened. Like I think that's so much more interesting than if we make it cute. Like I just
Yeah,
think it's so much more interesting to remember it accurately if we can.
yeah, absolutely. And, has your opinion changed at all? I mean, we going into this, you said you weren't sure about him.
I mean, I'm open. How about that? I can
Yeah.
see that he was a complex guy and also it was complex times. I recently heard something and it was somebody that was giving an excuse to Thomas Jefferson about like, oh, he just had slaves because it was very of the time. And it's like, well, but John Adams, like he inherited slaves and he like set them free. Like, so, and they're contemporaries. So what's there's a disconnect there. And so, and I feel like, especially in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, we have such a just a dynamic like and quite difficult history with the Native Americans and there's just so many pieces of this puzzle that are just like I don't know who I would be if I had been born in that time. I don't know what I would believe in. I know what I believe in now, so I can
Sure.
understand him possibly a little bit better. And for me, the amateur archaeology always gives me the ick, but I'm working on it because I do understand there's value in it too, because like when I went to like the Imija mounds and they're talking about like how so many of these mounds were lost because farmers just plowed them over. Like, and so
Sure.
at least in the case where Fred and Frank were out there with their shovels, at least they were taking notes and preserving what they could. So I'm trying to maybe see the other side of that too. And so yeah, I think it's been helpful to again just reframe it in a way that I'm not forgiving him, but I'm definitely seeing other sides of him, which is cool because he is
Yeah.
a very I definitely believe he's a vital part of Sioux Falls history.
Yeah. I really like what you said, and I think it's a good way to look at history. Just be open. When you're looking at history, be open to hear and to try to understand. Because we aren't there. We aren't there. We
Yeah.
can't sit down and we can't have a what was going through your mind kind of discussion with them. So
Yeah.
you've got to be open to it. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. And I love this conversation. It was so interesting. I really appreciate it, Kevin. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me here today. It's so great to talk local history and to talk Pettigrew with you today.
Yay! Thank you, Kevin.
Through the